Gearbox has now released their newest set of paddles, which are the GX2 models, and true to form, these are, without a doubt, one of a kind and feature very unique construction and gameplay characteristics that you truly won't find anywhere else. This is also the first time in a while that Gearbox has allowed the use of discount codes to purchase their paddles, and with this channel's discount code PBMED, you can take 10% off the price of any of these three GX2 models, bringing their final price to $243. This is obviously on the higher end of paddle prices, so I'll point out the facts and my personal findings so that you can decide if that price may be worth it to you. I'll share a sort of get to the point major takeaway and summary list here. The pros of the GX2 models in general include a very soft, plush feeling paddle face, which also elicits some of the highest level of vibration dampening of any paddle currently on the market, sneaky levels of power, and a robust array of construction that at least appears to give these paddles a trustable level of durability, though it is still pretty early in their existence to know that for sure. Some cons I found obviously include a higher price, some variability in swing weights, and a need for added weight to increase stability, at least on the two longer models. The two longer GX2 paddles, which are the elongated and Integra XL shapes, will be releasing first, with the wide body Hyper shape releasing sometime a month or two after this video releases. If you're familiar with the Gearbox's previous Pro Power or new Pro Ultimate Power shapes, the new GX2 models follow the same general measurement patterns, except for both of these paddles are 16mm thick. The elongated GX2 measured 16.5 inches long and is just about 7 3/8 inches wide, with a 5.5 inch handle length. The Integra is probably closest to what most people consider to be hybrid shaped, and though it stays the same width as the elongated GX2, the Integra is a little shorter at right about 16 3/8 inches long. The Integra also has a 5.5 inch handle length, and even though both of these paddles are 16mm thick, the handles still maintain that same narrow 4-inch handle circumference people have enjoyed on the 14mm Pro Power and Ultimate models. You can also clearly see a new checkered look on the face of the GX2 models, and that's because these paddles are using a much softer 3K woven carbon fiber on the surface, as opposed to linear T700 carbon fiber like the kind they used on the PBE and new Pro Ultimate Power. I'll go ahead and transition into my dissection and breakdown of this paddle now, so if you're mostly interested in how this paddle performs, feel free to skip this part and the numbersy heavy part directly after this and go right to the gameplay portion. Most of the time when I remove a paddle face, I'm able to remove most of the layers in one piece, but for the GX2s, everything was adhered very tightly and put together very intricately, so the only piece that came off in one was the outer layer of 3K carbon fiber. This was actually pretty nice because I was able to appreciate how soft and flexible this layer feels, which certainly contributes to the overall softer feel of the paddling gameplay. Underneath that, you can see the other layers of linear T700 carbon fiber on top of the SST 2.0 core. Looking at the SST 2.0 core of the GX2s, side by side the previous SST core on the PPE model I dissected, you can see that the black foam that existed in the PPE has been eliminated in the GX2s, and instead the carbon fiber rib segments extend all the way to the paddle edge. The segments in the middle of the core, which presumably take more ball impact, are visually more reinforced and more rigid and stiff to the touch than the rib segments just lateral to them. The foam in the center of the paddle appears to be the same foam used in the PPE model, and when I talked to Raphael, the owner of Gearbox, about this, he clarified that it's predominantly similar, but the overall amount that was used and the temperature in which it was expanded in deviates from the PPE models in a way that Gearbox believes will make this paddle last longer and less susceptible to expansion and degradation over time. You can also see why the Gearbox handles feel so uniform, as the octagon-shaped handle appears to be circumferentially molded in one continuous wrap as the handle descends down from the paddle face, even rounding the end and closing down at the bottom. Obviously, there's a lot going on in these cores, which have gone through a lot of R&D, and leave us with a paddle that literally cannot core crush and has proved to be such an incredible pain to tear apart that I'm led to believe that things like delamination and disbonding of the core from the paddle face to be extremely unlikely as well. Again, this next section will be very number heavy and nerdy, but I think this is good information that I hope will be helpful for people looking to use and customize these paddles. If you look at the measured metrics I have on the screen here, one thing you may notice is that even though the Integra is slightly shorter than the elongated GX2, mine came back with a slightly higher swing weight than its longer counterpart. I went ahead and reached out to some other reviewers to get a better idea of the general trends, and I touched base with Raphael about this, and he told me that in general, The normal ranges they see in the GX2 elongated is 120 plus or minus 3, and 116 plus or minus 3 in the Integra shape, which most paddles have been falling close to the middle ranges of. I compared numbers from about half a dozen other reviewers, and this does seem to track with all of their swing weights that fell inside these ranges, so it seems I got one of the heavier Integras and one of the lighter elongated GX2s for whatever that's worth. For your convenience, I also went ahead and tested the swing and twist weights of these two paddles stock, and with 3 grams of weight at the 4 and 6 o'clock positions, and 3 grams at the 3 and 9 o'clock positions, and I'll put those numbers on screen for you here so you can see what sort of changes to expect if you're looking to customize these paddles. It's also interesting to note that the balance point of these two paddles is almost 250, which is also on the higher end. You can think of balance point essentially as the center of mass on a paddle, and it captures an aspect of how a paddle feels in your hand that's missing in something like swing weight, which measures one end of a paddle while the other end is fixed to a machine. The higher the balance point number, the further out on a paddle the center of its weight is, which contributes to how much effort is required to turn a paddle over from a head down to head up position. If you think of your hand like a fulcrum the paddle pivots on, the balance point is the weight on the far end of the paddle pulling down on the paddle face, and whatever weight comes from the handle on the other side of your hand serves as a counterbalance. The median balance point of an elongated shaped paddle is roughly 242, which is derived from nearly 250 elongated shaped paddles in the Pickleball, etc. Pickleball Pursuit database. Here are the balance points of a few paddles I measured stock, and then after adding a 6 gram flick weight to the end of the handles. This brought the Pulse X, for example, well below the average balance point, and both the GX2 models right to the average balance point, which reduced the perceived head weight of these paddles and made them each much easier to roll and manipulate. Now, don't get me wrong here, I don't think everyone needs a flick weight to maneuver these paddles necessarily. In fact, I didn't use one on my Integra model, but I did prefer one on my GX2 elongated, especially since I thought it played best with some extra weight at the 4 and 6 o'clock positions. Spin was pretty decent on these paddles, with each coming in over 2,000 RPMs. This was pretty reassuring because these paddles don't feel very gritty on the surface, and I think that spin is imparted as the ribs in the core compress and wrap around the ball for a grab and throw type effect, which is certainly going to last longer than the RPMs that are reliant on high levels of grit on the face of the paddle. Measured drive speed was on the low end of what I consider to be high, and it's higher than you might expect because of the highly dampened feel off the face, which can sometimes make it hard to feel how hard you are actually hitting the ball. I hit the GX2 elongated directly side by side other elongated paddles with a dampened type feel that I think are most comparable, and it was clear to me that the GX2 hit the hardest on drives and recoiled the fastest for pop when compared to the TruFoams, the Pickleball Apes Pulse X, and the Proton Flamingo. As far as my overall experience in gameplay and what I think most people are going to think about these paddles, I think they're going to be very polarizing. I noticed right off the bat that these paddles felt very plush, and unless I hit out towards the edge of the paddle face, vibrations and feedback were non-existent. The best way I can describe how it feels to hit with these paddles is springy, and they feel a little bit more full to me than most paddles with Gen 3 construction. The harder I swung, the more springy and powerful the paddles hit in a slightly exponential manner. The Integra model in particular felt moderately maneuverable, and though it's technically shorter than a typical elongated paddle, it felt like I was playing with an elongated paddle most of the time with the benefit of a little better maneuverability. Even though the swing weight on my particular elongated GX2 was lighter than my Integra, for whatever reason it felt a touch less maneuverable and a little bit more powerful by direct comparison between the two, and the elongated version felt a little less maneuverable than the average elongated paddle. I felt like I could control these paddles pretty well, but if you rely on feel or the sound of the ball hitting the face to help you dial in your control, these probably won't help because they are very quiet and did not transmit much ball feel back into my hand. In fact, almost every time I've played with a GX2, I've had people come over and comment about how quiet these paddles were, especially in a facility filled with YOLOs and paddle techs. If I compare these paddles directly to the previous Pro Power elongated and Integra models, I think most people are going to like these paddles quite a bit more. Power is definitely toned down in the GX2s, but they're still on the low end of the power range overall, and I think they're going to be much more manageable and controllable for most players. The added thickness and edge guard does seem to have improved the sweet spots a bit too, which is one of the major cons I found in the PPE and the Pro Power Integra. Additionally, over the time that I've had the GX2 so far, I haven't noticed much of a break-in period, which goes directly opposed to the big break-in the Pro Power models had as they got more and more hot the more you played with them. It's still pretty early to know what the GX2s will do or what changes we may see over the course of several months, But as of right now, it looks pretty promising that these paddles will be somewhat more stable than the Pro Powers. Even though the sweet spots are improved on the GX2s, I would say they felt somewhere around the average to small side of average mark overall, and I think they do benefit from some added weight at either the 4 and 6 or the 3 and 9 o'clock positions. Maybe it was a little bit in my head, but these slightly longer elongated GX2s felt a bit more head heavy than the Integra when I added extra weight, so I used a 6-gram flick weight on the handle, which made it easier to turn over and flick during gameplay. Even though there's some overlap in the heavier Integra GX2 models and in the lighter elongated GX2 models, generally speaking, the elongated GX2 is the one I would go with if you want the option with higher plow-through drive power, and I would go with the Integra GX2 if you want an overall feel of an elongated paddle, even though it's a marginal amount shorter, but want higher maneuverability in exchange for a slightly less amount power on drives. In summary, I think people are going to like these paddles if they like a very plush and springy feel with little feedback into the hand and good but not overwhelming power. Even though we don't know for absolute certainty yet what these paddles are going to look like several months down the road, I do feel much better recommending them to people knowing they are much more likely to last when compared to some other Gen 3 paddles that seem like ticking time bombs. If you enjoy the sound of loud pop, or if you prefer good feedback into hand, clearly these are not going to be the paddles for you, and you're going to have to be okay with trying the buy once, cry once for the price point here. That's my take on the new Gearbox GX2 paddles. I hope the review was helpful. Like always, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll catch you here for the next one.